create their own narrative right now.
All right, welcome to Nobo Monitoring Parameters in Sports Analytics. And Russ is going to take over and introduce himself as well.
All right, thanks for coming, everybody. I love this. We've got a nice small group. We can keep this really conversational. Stop me if you want. Just so you know who I am, so that puts some of my comments into context and lets you realize that when I drift into areas I don't know, you can call bullshit on me, and that would be great. I was born an engineer, worked in healthcare and medical devices really my entire career. Companies like GE Healthcare, Honeywell Life Care Solutions, and a startup out of Medical College of Wisconsin. Worked on a couple of projects that are kind of relevant to this discussion, including the industry's first bedside blood gas analysis machine, an IT system that brought genetic and molecular factors to ambulatory care, and most recently at Nobo, we're developing a wearable device that monitors hydration levels of elite athletes. So, my goal with this really is to not give you a lot of answers. I don't have a lot of answers, but I hope we can spur some thought, spur some conversation. I'd love to have some conversations with all of you at the end. Really, this talk is about a tale of three tales. We're going to look at biometrics and patient monitoring and the growth of biometrics in the monitoring field, because I think biometrics and athletics are really kind of mirroring that evolution. And ultimately, I think it's going to be really key to see how an analytics platform and an analytics layer on top of all those biometrics can really create value. If you look back at the history of continuously measuring stuff about the body, it really kind of dates back to the 50s and some of the early ECG monitoring. Not long after, there was specialized hardware circuits that could generate heart rates from that information, arguably some of the first analytics on ECG data. And eventually, patient monitoring grew, and we added more and more modular parameters, things like blood pressure and body temperature, pulse oximetry, blood oxygenation, and a whole host of other parameters. And we wound up with this, which I guess we'll call progress. But imagine the amount of data that's being collected on this individual in a trauma unit. It's really kind of amazing, right? It's kind of overwhelming. So if you look at just one of those monitors, you can see what's being collected. It's heart rate, it's ECG, it's respiration, blood oxygenation, blood pressure, temperature. And you might stop and ask yourself, well, all that information is really interesting, but what is it really telling me about that patient's condition right now? Where's the algorithmic assessment of all of those parameters? Where's that analysis coming from? Probably not a surprise that the analysis is coming from our team of lovely, smiling care providers that are looking at those numbers, looking at those waveforms, and using their own experience and education and intuition to assess how that patient is doing as a whole. We are whole people. We are not waveforms and numbers, right? We're big, complex organisms. So the biometrics and athletics, I think the evolution has been very similar. Goes back to the early 2000s. And some of the first GPS tracking to track locomotion and load in athletes. That, of course, was simplified for the consumer world. If you remember that Nike Plus dongle that you had to surgically implant into your shoes. But the goal here was largely the same. It was about tracking locomotion at a consumer level. Eventually, consumer devices started adding more and more parameters, oftentimes in very modular ways, just like patient monitoring. We added heart rate, we added galvanic skin response and skin temperature and all kinds of other things. And then at a professional level, we started adding things like heart rate variability and respiration, EMG, undoubtedly a host of things I'm not even aware of. But the situation, if you look at the next layer up, the situation still kind of remains the same. Each of those sensors is providing a number and a waveform. And there's no sense of what that means about that person, about that athlete. How's that athlete doing? What should or shouldn't she do in the coming days and weeks to optimize her performance and make sure she stays healthy? Well, that job, to do that analysis, no big surprise, falls to our lovely, smiling athletic trainers. They're looking at that data and the waveforms, they're doing that analysis, and they're determining what's going on with that athlete. That is a picture I hope looks really familiar. So I contend that these are just like the physicians in a hospital. These are wonderfully trained, caring people, but there's still subjective bias that's being applied to that analytics. And I think there's a real opportunity for robust, automated cross-parameter analytics to really create insight into what's going on with those athletes, and ultimately create something that's very, very actionable. What can an athlete do with that information to actually improve themselves? I see it kind of like this. We have a lot of different biometrics, but largely they're all really siloed. You know, we're working on, let's take position as an example, and I'm not going to pick on Calvin, but you know, if we think about position, there's a lot of really, really interesting analytics going on in position, right? There's some fantastic information that's being drawn from that single parameter. I would argue we can find out even more if we start looking at all of the information we have about a patient together, you know, and really try to understand the athlete's condition and how they're doing at any given time.
Yeah. When you say position, like what exactly do you mean? I'm not sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. Athletes, so it's kind of my abstraction. Athlete's position versus time, right? If you know GPS location versus time, you can calculate, and I think Kevin's going to get into that, so I'm not going to steal, I'm not going to say anything because I'll say it wrong, but that's what I'm referring to there.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, this layer that kind of ties all these metrics together, I would argue, doesn't really exist in any kind of meaningful way today. In fact, I'll go even a little bit further. I think that cross-parameter analytics layer is really a force multiplier for any new biometric that comes along. Any new biometric is really interesting on its own, right? It does give you a new slice of information about a patient. But when you look at all those parameters as a whole, and you try to understand the person as a whole, that's when the value of any one parameter, you know, it just kind of explodes, and it creates more and more value for any one of its new parameters. And when I talk about new parameters, I've got a couple of examples that I think are really kind of interesting. So let's take a look at those and start to imagine and dream about what we may or may not be able to do with some of that cross-parameter analytics. The first one, lots of people have probably seen Whoop in the sleep analysis. Now Whoop is doing, they're doing a great job of actually providing recommendations for training intensity based on sleep patterns. That's really cool. I think that's fantastic. That's an actionable outcome based on their analytics of sleep. But how does heart rate at any given time affect sleep patterns, and how does sleep affect heart rate? How can we look at you know, perhaps body temperature in conjunction with sleep patterns over the last few days, and really try to create even more and more information about that athlete and about what's going on within that athlete. I think it's kind of cool. This one I find absolutely fascinating too. I suspect lots of us in this room have never really considered how menstrual cycles affect performance on an athletic field. Some of us undoubtedly have. But it's a fascinating topic, right? Because hormone levels are going to affect your performance. I don't think that's going out on a limb to make that claim. So this is an application called Fitter Woman, and they are also trying to create training recommendations based on hormone levels. That's really cool, right? That's a very actionable, tangible outcome of their analytics. But let's say I'm tracking my sleep with Whoop, and I'm using this application, and I get 2 different training recommendations for tomorrow. How do you reconcile that information? It's really only through that cross-parameter analytics where you can resolve discrepancies, figure out what's really happening to that person, and make clear recommendations.
I had a quick question. With this whole like menstrual cycle and performance thing, you know, if they introduce wearables, for example, for women, do you think this would be some sort of privacy issue that they would have, and it would make it difficult for them to be able to run?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not here to. I'm not necessarily advocating these individual products. I'm not affiliated. Well, I am affiliated with the last one, so I'll disclose that. But yeah, I'm not affiliated with any of these. I just think they're really interesting examples of single biometrics that we may or may not think of as biometrics today. But my mind sort of wanders to how would this fit into an entire ecosystem if we're really doing a good job of analyzing every piece of information we have about an individual.
No, it's fascinating. That's why I was curious.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, there's privacy issues with every piece of data we're collecting, right? There's no ignoring that.
Right.
But
It is.
This is a company called RunScribe, and they're doing gait analysis for runners. They're looking at things like shock and symmetry and a variety of other pieces of analytics. I think that's really cool, right? I'm an engineer. I think that's really cool. I would look at that data all day long. But I think it becomes really, really valuable if you start thinking about how does your gait change as you become tired during practice? Does it change? Are gait changes indicative of sleep quality, or how do we tie temperature? Can we plan practices with temperature, heart rate, and gait goals in mind? I don't know. I think there's a lot of information there, but it's
So we're both
really
wondering,
interesting.
what is gait?
A runner's gait. So the foot position, how long you stride, how short you stride, that kind of thing. How your foot lands as you're running.
The angle?
It's kind of
The
like
The angles, yeah,
mechanics.
yeah, correct.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So I think, again, that's really interesting on its own, but it becomes just immensely powerful when it's combined with all the other biometrics. This is the one I'm affiliated with, and this is a shameless plug. But we're working on monitoring hydration levels in athletes. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the space, that hydration is really monitored today by weighing an athlete before and after practice. It's kind of the general standard. Well, that doesn't do you a lot of good until after the practice, and then it's too late because practice is over. And we're working hard within our silo to get an accurate, reliable hydration measurement. That's still really important. But where we get really, really excited is when we start looking at hydration in conjunction with load, in conjunction with maximum speed, max heart rate, all of those other kinds of parameters. I think that's where our value really begins to multiply as well. So, I will say this kind of cross-platform analytics that I'm talking about, outcome-based, actionable analytics, it's really hard, because the companies that I put up here, I think they're all fairly young, fairly new companies. They're very focused on developing their product within their silo. Necessarily, that's what you have to. That's where you have to start. It's very hard to find the time and the resources to do this kind of analysis, but I think it's incredibly valuable. It's good that we have cool analytics within a single biometric. That's a good thing. It's better if we can have cool analytics that are looking at multiple parameters and trying to figure out what we can understand about the athlete. And then, of course, it really has to be actionable, because if we're not creating concrete recommendations, concrete changes, if we're not driving new habits, all the analytics in the world just don't do us very much good. We have to be able to optimize health and optimize performance in very concrete, specific ways. And so I think I'll stop here. I would love to have a conversation and discussion and hear some questions and thoughts and snide remarks about anything here. So I'll just open it up. Yeah?
Yeah, so you talked about, it's really interesting with the Nobo, you said that it could possibly work with load and all that type of stuff. Would that be something that you guys would measure along with it, or is it something where maybe it would work like with another interface, like say Zephyr?
So I think for us, that's at least half business question, right? If not more, half a business strategy. I think for us, we're looking at kind of depends on the market and a sort of a staged approach. I think once we have a hydration monitor that we believe in, has been scientifically validated, we'll also start to include some of the things that are in every wearable in the world, right? We'll start to include some of the step tracking and things like that, and we'll probably do that on our own. When we start talking about far more advanced analytics and far more advanced cross-platform, then we would absolutely be looking for partners to work with, and there are a lot of them out there, of course.
Yeah. No,
that makes perfect sense.
I was interested because I know at Arkansas we talked about this, that we wanted to measure hydration levels, but we already have contracts with Zephyr, we have contracts with different companies, so I didn't know if you guys had the ability to combine that sort of data and have some sort of partnership.
Yeah. Partnerships are clearly part of our strategy. There's no doubt. It's tough for a brand new company to go it alone. So.
Right. That's incredible.
What stage of development are you in with the product?
So we are still development stage. We're going through, working through our validation protocol, for lack of a better word. We're starting with some internal validation. We'll be working with our first few sports teams very soon, and then ultimately we'll be doing a scientifically robust validation of the technology with a university-affiliated research lab.
Okay.
We're just kind of not there yet, but we're working our way.
Yeah. What are some of the challenges you've run into rolling it out to athletes?
Unfortunately, we spent a lot of time wrestling with things that don't have anything to do with the hydration measurement. It's the stuff that you just have to have a decent product. It's worn during competition, right? So it's got to be sweat proof. Well, for some of our early prototypes, that was a bigger challenge than you would think that it would have been. We had, I guess this is related to our measurement technique, it's actually an optical technology, similar to a pulse oximeter. And we wound up with some problems dealing with ambient light, and sunlight, that kind of thing. So those were the technical challenges. Obviously, there's always startup challenges, right? Funding people, the standard things I think every startup faces.
Okay. And it's worn on the wrist?
We're actually putting the device on the athlete's calf. Not that it has to be there, but we've heard from the athletes that we've talked to that that's a convenient, out-of-the-way place.
Yeah, not invasive.
We're still trying to validate everything still has to be validated, right? It's always, you're always validating forever and ever. Yeah.
So for two companies with what you and I would both agree are complementary products, and that they're sort of in separate verticals, but the data likely will work together.
Yep.
And this is honestly way more of a business question, but there's a lot of value in the data that each company provides, and therefore they want to keep it sort of, to themselves. But we talk about partnership. I talk about it as well, and just as much as you do. Until there is a partnership, it's hard to know if the analytics are going to be valuable when paired up. How do you see that sort of playing out in the industry? Not just for small companies like you and I, but even for, a Catapult, where it's a big company, they're starting to break out themselves into some of the other verticals, but there is a lot of other stuff going on.
I will say that as an athletics industry, I sure hope we do better than healthcare. The reality in healthcare, I mentioned the modular parameters that are going on in patient monitoring, right? Well, the reality is that many of those modules are made by different companies. And there's, this isn't strictly true, but largely those different companies don't want to play with each other. They see their data as proprietary, and you're going to use my system, and you can't buy a pulse oximeter from somebody else. You have to buy mine, and so therefore I'm not going to share my data, and we're not going to do that robust analytics. I sure hope that doesn't happen here, right? It's just too valuable and too powerful. So, I think it's also kind of like finding that partnership to work on the analytics. Kind of like finding your first customers too, right? At some point, someone's going to see the vision, and they're going to believe in the vision, and they're going to be willing to take a risk, right? Because you're right, it is a risk until that work has been done and you've proven and validated the value. It's not proven and validated until that time. So it's kind of like finding that early adopter partner, just like an early adopter customer as well.
I have a question. So for a lot of products that I see, like especially this, right? Like when I think about like measuring hydration, right? I think that's measuring. I guess call it like your body's output, right? Like through sweat, through whatever measures, right? And just for myself personally, I think about like my own health and development, and one of the challenges is like all of the inputs, like whether it's like my diet, like what I'm eating every day, how much water I'm drinking every day, feels like that's like an even larger limiting factor than being able to like measure everything that's happening like once I'm starting to perform. Like how do you see those kinds of challenges being ultimately addressed, like with the input factors, whether it's the training regimens and the documentation and data collection around?
That's a really interesting question. I think that's a very good question. I'm not sure I have a ready answer for that. I've been trying to start a discussion here, right? So if anyone else has an answer, please jump in. I think on a nutrition side, there are companies that are trying to measure the inputs, right? They're trying to measure the smart water bottles and things like that, or trying to automatically measure
Right.
how much is being consumed. Does that same thing, as far as I know, isn't really happening in the training plan kind of world. I think that's just that's not being automated, not being measured. It's just sort of up to the individuals to keep track of that kind of information. You started to say you were looking for something.
Well, no, I'm just looking for a solution, because whether it's the time involved in planning the response to how I feel my body reacting to the different workouts, it starts to feel like a burden that's inhibiting my ability to increase my performance. Right, when I have to spend time just meal planning. As an example. Making sure I get the right amount of calories, protein, carbs, etc., and all the nutrients.
Well, you can imagine a world, if you will, where that cross-parameter analysis layer is trying to help with exactly that, right? It's trying to look at, your load during your previous workout and what your current weight, hydration status are, and try to recommend some type of meal plan. I don't think that's a ways off, obviously, but you can imagine that's a potential output of that analysis.
Ideal.
Yeah, and then that becomes another nice actionable output of that layer.
Yeah, so I think kind of on that point is if you look at where AI is right now, we have to be able to measure the outputs before we can start tweaking the inputs. And so if we can measure the outputs, then we can start tweaking the inputs, and then we can generate AI that will say, if you want your output goal to be whatever, then your input goal needs to be whatever. So it's coming sooner than we think, but until we can truly measure the outputs, tweaking the inputs is, it's not irrelevant, but it's kind of guesswork.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
I guess this kind of piggybacks off of him. My question is I know for me, I have certain health issues to where my hydration levels need to be different than someone else's. Is that something that you guys account for, or is that because I feel like everybody kind of has a different level that they need to be at.
And so I would, we account for it by how we're actually doing the measurement. We're actually measuring the water in the tissues.
Okay.
So we're not a smart water bottle kind of solution where, the 8 glasses 8 times a day, that kind of thing.
Okay.
We're actually measuring water in the tissues. So that kind of compensates for an awful lot of what the body's already doing. Now, not everything, of course.
Right.
But that's kind of how we're taking that into account.
So measurement is being addressed based on, you said, water in the tissue. Is the only reason that it would be low, for example, be hydration, or are there other factors that could come
there are other factors, and that we could get into a long discussion. But yeah, there are certainly other factors involved, but for the applications we're looking at, we think it's a really reliable and robust technique.
Okay.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Roger.